Howdy healers, welcome to Zero to KSM Hero, a series where I'll be attempting the Keystone Master Challenge in patch 9.1.5 on a brand new healer. Before we start, let's go over the rules and regulations and whatever else is out there. So, I've seen this done before by various WoW content creators, most recently by the PvP community, but this was actually inspired in large part by our Mythic Plus friend Growl. I couldn't resist the allure of a challenge, and when I say challenge, I mean challenge, with a capital C. My goal is simple. I want Keystone Master. I am not starting on a fresh account, or even a new server. You see, I'm already playing with a personal handicap, chronic pain. I have arthritis and tendinitis, so I get the full hand-hurtin' package. Stiff and painful joints, burning in my thumbs, arms, and elbows, and even numbness in my ring and pinky fingers. Because of these things, I am what I would describe as a mediocre player, especially considering how long I've been playing the game. Having hands that don't work right means that even though I am quite knowledgeable about the game, I still tend to struggle at anything that requires great reaction timing. And before anyone worries too much about me playing a video game with hands that are this bad, let me just say that typing out timestamps for every dungeon I did on my journey hurt my hands far worse than any gameplay ever could. So, if you're here to see God tier plays, to watch me succeed at the speed of light, or to learn from la creme de la creme, you are probably watching the wrong video. I'm just a regular, average person, dumb enough to attempt to pug Keystone Master. That's right, I did say pug. So, please stick around. Maybe you'll find this journey interesting. I've played every spec of every class at least once, and every healer spec multiple times. When considering taking on this challenge, I weighed my possibilities based both on my personal comfort with the spec and its viability within the current WoW meta. I wanted to avoid playing the current meta classes, especially paired with the current meta covenants for those classes. So I knew I wanted to avoid, say, Venthyr Holy Paladins and Kyrian Shaman. In the end, I did a pinch of research to see which covenants seemed to be least popular for which spec, and then organized my list from the healing spec that I was most comfortable with to the one that I was least comfortable with. So here's the list. At the top of the list we have Resto Shaman, followed by Discipline Priest, Resto Druid, Holy Priest, Mistweaver Monk, and then Holy Paladin. I've played Resto Shaman mains for more than one expansion, and Discipline was my BFA main, though I would argue that I'm barely passable at the spec. Resto Druid, Holy Priest, and Mistweaver are kind of in the middle for me. I've played them before, but never in anything more serious than leveling dungeons. I am god-awful at Holy Paladin. Like, I'm terrible. You'd think that would make the spec the clear winner here, especially as Night Fae, but Holy Paladins in general are, just like Shaman, like very much the meta right now. They're desirable in keys for this reason, which means that they would be very likely to get invited to groups, and I don't want to skew results at all. Plus, and this is purely selfish, my biggest fear in playing a Night Fae Holy Paladin is that I might get kicked from the dungeon before it even starts for being the completely wrong covenant, or people might just assume I'm Venthyr or Kyrian and pull dungeons accordingly, which would be the actual worst healing experience imaginable. It makes my hands sweaty just thinking about it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would make for hilarious content, but for a first try at Keystone Master, it just didn't seem worth it. Which left me with 3 more reasonable choices: Resto Druid, Holy Priest, and Mistweaver Monk. They all have their pros and cons, but why not just go with the least popular healing class right now? Night Fae Mistweaver it is. Let's get those declines rolling. I'm also, for that extra sting of pain, a diehard Alliance player. Now, for full transparency, and because I'm not starting over on a new account, I've never gotten Keystone Master. My main for 9.0, Kessia of Warm Rest Accord, did do some Mythic Plus dungeons in Season 1, but nothing of real note. I'll put that information on screen for you to look at. Just know that I was brought to that 1+10 for heroism and heroism alone. I applied to a group who specified that they were looking for it, and then spent the entire run on the verge of a panic attack. I felt like a complete idiot the entire time because I was certain I had no business being in a key that high, but maybe that was just the anxiety talking. Mana, my Resto Shaman that I was just getting into before I went to Classic BC, also did some Mythic Plus dungeons, but there's even less of note here. I will not be linking my new Mistweaver with my main account on Raider.io. Anyone could figure out that my new character isn't on a brand new account, but I don't think folks in the group finder are going to be looking that closely since the deepest they seem to look is eye level and Raider.io score. Even if they look at my account achievement points, they'd find I've never done anything that anyone would consider difficult. I'm much more likely to just get straight up declined for more realistic reasons anyway, like low eye level, not having heroism, or being a Mistweaver. Hashtag Mistweaver life. And even though I have a main on this server to feed myself a bit of gold and other resources, I won't be going overboard in those departments because I do want to kind of mimic what the average player would have access to on a new healing alt, with alt being the key word here. This is not going to be a video series mimicking a new player experience. I've been playing WoW since 2007, and that is something I literally cannot do. And honestly, I would never recommend healing or tanking to brand new players unless they were particularly confident in their ability to learn and memorize information, which is something I've found most people are not great at doing quickly. WoW has a lot of stuff going on all the time, and it's hard to jump in with no experience and take on a role that requires, by its very nature, a deep understanding of class and game mechanics. I will always recommend that new players try out a DPS class to start with so that they can get a feel for how dungeons are done and how they can assist the group with the smallest potential for negative impact on themselves and their game experience. This video series is the recording of my personal journey to and through Mythic Plus content after many years of playing very casually, anxiety, and chronic pain. Now, I will be making an effort to be new player friendly, as I'll be going over mechanics and ways various classes can deal with each encounter, but I like to think this series will also function as a very down-to-earth and realistic picture of what to expect when pugging KSM on a character when you're still kind of like learning the ins and outs of a class you're not overly familiar with. So, the rules are going to be simple. For the Alliance, least favorite healer, least popular covenant, only moderate help from the main character allowed, no linking Raider.io to main character, not that it would help much, pugging only, and I will need to finish the challenge before posting the first video to avoid any external help or assistance, basically just for the sake of integrity. So, with all that out of the way, let's jump into it. Meet Joie, my baby Mistweaver. She is currently level 10 and sporting heirloom gear because, that's right, it's time to level. But first, the most important thing. I need a transmog. I guess that works. I went with a Draenei because I love Draenei. Draenei are actually the reason I started playing the game in the first place, though that's a story for another day. As a Draenei, I get Gift of the Naru, a little heal I can use on myself or others. It's not the best racial ever, but it's also not the worst. So let's work on leveling. Today's goal is to complete just 2 dungeons. It's not a lot, but it should be good for the intro, a nice little jump into the queue to see what's going on and to get a feel for how this character is going to play. If you're a confident person who feels you know your class well, I think it's fair to jump into healing at level 60. Questing in a DPS or tank spec is way faster than dungeon queuing after all, but I like to dungeon queue since dungeons are my favorite group activity in the game, and always have been. It gives me practice healing while I level, lets me try out unusual specs, and I get to weave new abilities into my skill set as I go, instead of running into the brick wall of having a million buttons to put on my bars all at once that I don't really understand. I'm going to start Chromie time in Cataclysm, also known as Classic, due to the large array of dungeons and quests available there. While I get that sorted, I want to be clear about the fact that I don't really have many WoW friends, and even the ones I do have, I don't really talk to them much, or at all really. I do that thing a lot where I add someone, and then I never message them again because I'm a coward. Not even one friend applied to a group I was in while I recorded this series, so you don't have to worry about the potential that I might have gotten help from pre-existing friends. What friends? Most of mine went Horde anyway. Because I wouldn't let myself post anything related to this challenge until after it was completed, you already know that I succeeded at achieving Keystone Master. Well, this video series started for me personally by me asking myself the question, can I do it? Because, I genuinely didn't know if this was something I was capable of doing or not. It's now more a question of how I did it. The mistakes I made, my personal successes, and any interesting experiences I had along the way. Finally, it is my goal to provide quality episodes that are neither unedited nor over-edited. As we get further and further into the series, there will probably be less and less to talk about with regards to simple things like dungeon and class mechanics, so I don't want to force y'all to sit through hours and hours of completely unedited footage where not a lot happens and I don't have much to say. However, I also don't want to cut entire dungeons from the series for any reason. So here's to hoping I'll be able to strike a balance. If you have a preference, please feel free to comment on it at any point during the series. If I find people prefer more or less editing, I'll be able to comply pretty easily. Alright, so I think it's worth talking about my UI now, the add-ons I'm using, and all of that stuff, just to get it out of the way, since I'm sure most of it will come up later anyway. To start with, in the upper left-hand corner, I have Trophy GCD, an add-on that tracks the abilities I'm using as I use them. If you're ever curious about what spells I'm casting, this add-on will let you see the icons as they're being used. My bars, which are all over the screen actually, the vertical bar on the lower left side, the bars in the middle at the bottom, and the double stacked bars above my party frames, as well as my experience bar, are all dominoes. My player frame and target frame are shadowed unit frames, heavily edited to basically just show health, since I track mana in Voodoo and other resources through weak auras. Speaking of weak auras, the spinning circle and cooldown thing in the middle of the screen between my player and target frame is a weak aura. I fashioned this based off of an old set of weak auras that Growl, aka Yummy TV, used to use for his druid, and try to make one for every class that I have. They're not publicly available yet because I'm lazy and I haven't polished them up enough to upload, but if there's enough interest in it, I might take the time. I use details for information in the lower right, and I like to have 4 small windows open. Fully encourage people to use an add-on like this, but I also find that most people use it and keep the window massive, which doesn't actually give you much more information, if any, so I have it just big enough to show 5 party members, and I track damage done, healing done, interrupts, and avoidable damage taken. The latter of which is actually an elitism helper add-on for details. It's 100% worth getting it, as it does help you see how much avoidable damage the party takes, including yourself, and it's extremely valuable when it comes to understanding why a dungeon might have gone poorly or smoothly. It's also not as intrusive as elitism helper tends to be, where it doesn't broadcast to the chat that people have stood and stuff, so you're not rude when you use it, and it's purely for your own information. I guess you could also broadcast it to party if you need to. For example, somebody tells you that, I don't know, your healing sucks or whatever, when the reality is that they were eating cleaves to the face or something. Naturally, I use Voodoo for my party frames. So if you'd like to try Voodoo out and are intimidated by the setup, I have a few video tutorials out that should help with that. Most of my other add-ons are, kind of inconsequential, but here they are just in case. I use mix scrolling battle text for the scrolling text you can see on the upper sides of the screen. I do this to avoid numbers cluttering up my field of vision in the middle of the screen. I literally don't need to see healing numbers anyway, but I do like to have them there just for the sake of it, I guess. But Voodoo does tell me if people are, alive or not, so it's not that I need to see the healing numbers. Auto Loot Plus, or Faster Loot for faster looting. Better Wardrobe and Transmog, Can I Mog It, and Transmog tokens are nice for gathering Transmog. My chat box is Chatter. I use Here Kitty for audio cues for things like combo points. It doesn't really come up much or at all on this character, but you may end up hearing some of the sounds from it, so that's what it is. I use Khalil's tracker for my quest tracker on the right. Hide talking head is what I use to get rid of those stupid talking head dialogue boxes from the most recent expansions. They take up so much of your screen and are really quite tiresome to deal with, so I prefer to just eliminate them. You will still see the dialogue and hear it in the chat box, but it doesn't put a pop-up on your screen that you have to click off of to, like use your bars or whatever. I use Omni CC for cooldown numbers on my abilities, and Omni CD for party cooldowns to the right of my voodoo bars. OP or OPI for openable rings to put abilities on. I don't use this too often, but I do use it for raid markers and world markers with the keybinds Alt F for raid markers and Alt W for world markers. Pre-made groups filter lets me filter groups in the looking for group feature by roles. So for example, as a healer, I can't apply to groups that already have a healer. I mean, I could, but I'm not going to get accepted. So I prefer not to see them at all. When I use this add-on, I can filter out groups that already have healers. So it's very useful. And I would argue it's probably the most useful for a DPS since they're going to find a lot of groups that already have 3 DPS in the group finder. My cast bars, both mine and my targets, are Quartz. Quartz also has a built-in swing and auto shot timer that I love. And I have been using Quartz since Wrath of the Lich King, and I'll never give it up. I'm also using Raider IO for, Mythic Plus rating. Scrap to auto-sell my grays and trash. Sexy Map for my map. Silver Dragon for my rares. My nameplates are tidy plates. I use Tiny Tooltip for my tooltips. And let's see, Deja character stats are for a better stat compilation on my character screen. I use Deadly Boss mods for encounters. TSM for auctioning and seeing the approximate value of items. And last but probably actually least, Total RP3 is an RP add-on, which you won't see me use in this series personally, because I don't actually RP in-game myself. However, I do enjoy making profiles for my characters, and sometimes reading the profiles of other people, which you may actually see me do that in dungeons sometimes if I run across another RP player. If you notice any other add-ons as we go through this series that you're just curious about or you want confirmation on the name of it, feel free to ask. I will do my best to help you. I use a lot of add-ons, I'll admit, and not all of them are specifically helpful to me, but what can you do? Alright, so we're nearing up on the end of our first dungeon that we're healing on this character. And Earthsong Falls is kind of an easier dungeon. There isn't a lot of damage going out really at any point. You do want to watch out with the groups of dinosaurs since they can silence. The higher levels you are, the worse the scaling gets, I think. So if you end up in here at, say, like level 40, it's probably going to be harder to heal than it is at level 10, where the scaling is whack, and characters that are level 10, like you can see how much I'm healing this tank for in one Vivify. So at level 40 I wouldn't be healing a tank for that much healing, so it's a little bit easier now. But the only thing to really watch out for in this dungeon is probably the rock boss, where he does stun everybody, and sometimes the damage that comes out during the stun can be kind of heavy. Not too worried about it with a paladin tank because they can bubble if they're in danger, but just something, I don't know, like I was trying to keep him topped off before the stun, so that's that. Overall though, this is a pretty simple dungeon and there isn't a lot to worry about, but you can also see how much self-healing this tank did the whole dungeon, honestly. Like on the healing meter, which is on the lower right hand side, the one on top, you can see that he is healing himself when he feels even slightly in danger, which is what a good tank does in the current expansion. Self-healing is kind of a requirement nowadays for tanks, and it's not just an option, as we'll find out later in the video series. But Earthsong Falls is a pretty simple dungeon. It's not a lot of XP for the time it takes, but when you have the quest up, it's totally worth your time anyway. So we've completed the dungeon and we're ready to queue for number 2. Now, I do want to point out that I'm not going to go through every leveling dungeon like this. Like, you're not going to have to watch every single leveling dungeon, which is good because there are 61 of them, in case you wondered. I actually have a spreadsheet with all the timestamps, and I have one just in order of every dungeon that I did. And let me just say, it's rough. I did a lot of dungeons. Just as a quick, like, heads up on how many dungeons I did do, I think it was like 93 mythic dungeons to get Keystone Master. So you're in for a long journey, but it's not going to be nearly as long because part 2 is going to be only leveling, but it's going to be all 61 dungeons, just kind of like, I'm going to go over stuff, but I'm not going to show every dungeon that I did. It would be like a 20-hour long video, and nobody wants that. I don't even want that. I don't want to edit that. That sounds terrible. I have some highlights from my leveling experience, and I did learn some things in the process, like there were some shocks. There were some shocks. I actually found out that healing 1 to 50 was sometimes more strenuous than healing 50 to 60, and I'm very excited to kind of showcase how that went. So, like as you're healing, as you're learning, the goal is to kind of put new abilities into your, well, I wouldn't call it a rotation. I guess it's more of a toolkit. So you're inserting new abilities into your toolkit as you're leveling, and in doing this, you start to get acquainted with these new abilities you get kind of as you go. So when I get Thunder Focus Tea, I'm going to get in the habit of using it. When I take the Talent Mana Tea, I'm going to get into the habit of using it. And the point of doing this is that even though at this level the healing may not be required, like you don't need every cooldown, you want to be in the habit of using cooldowns. Like, the most important advice that I could ever give any healer, especially a new healer, is don't hold your cooldowns. Don't ever hold your cooldowns. Not forever, anyway. It's okay to hold your cooldowns, like, a little bit. For example, the next boss is going to do a lot of damage, so you save one of your good cooldowns for that boss. That's totally fine. But in general, you don't want to save your, 15-second cooldown or your 30-second cooldown or even your minute-long cooldown when you're not expecting anything particularly crazy. You want to get into the habit of using those things and not saving them. Because usually what happens is when you save a cooldown for a very long period of time, you end up never using it. Or in the case of, say, let's go with Thunder Focus Tea. It's on a 30-second cooldown, and if you talent for it, you get 2 charges of it, both of them on that 30-second cooldown. So if you don't use it for 15 minutes of the dungeon because you don't think that you needed it, you could have gotten so much more throughput by using it many, many times in that time period. And I think it's true of any cooldown. Like, another one that Mistweavers get is Yu'lon. You could use Yu'lon every, I think it's 3 minutes. So if you don't use her and it's been 15 minutes into the dungeon, you could have used her 5 times by that point, you know what I mean? So you could have gotten the extra assistance, and obviously the better use that you have of your cooldowns, the more damage you can contribute to the group if that is necessary, and the less stress you'll be under when things start going crazy. So obviously at this stage nothing crazy is happening. The wildest thing going on is, I don't know, tanks taking a lot of damage maybe because they're low level and they don't have all of their abilities yet. But yeah. So something else a little bit funny that you're going to see me do is in these lower level dungeons, I'm going to abuse my mana pool a lot. Nothing costs a lot of mana at this level, so I do use spells inefficiently, but I know eventually I'm going to have to shape up and be careful, so I'm also kind of mindful at this point, even though it doesn't really look like it. I'm kind of paying attention to, as I level up, like how much more the spell costs to cast and all of that other stuff. So I at this level and being newer to the class, I guess you could say, my main goal is just keeping people alive. Like, I'm not going to worry over much about DPS or contributing DPS because my job is to keep the group alive, and if I do something stupid or somebody dies because I tunnel on DPSing, then I failed at my job. So while the DPS a healer can put out is super nice, I am not focusing on that, especially while leveling up. Also worth noting is that when your toolkit is limited anyway, you kind of got to do what you got to do. So, like, most of the time, I wouldn't just spam Vivifies on a tank anyway, unless, you know, I didn't really have another choice, especially with something like Soothing Mist available, but honestly, at this level, it's all I had. So, when I get other spells, I'll start weaving them in, my healing will get a little bit better, but I'll be honest with you, throughout this entire series, I burn through mana like nothing else. And I think that that's fine. Like, it's not the most efficient way to do things, but in these disorganized groups where you don't know that people know what they're doing or not, it's not worth the headache of not keeping people mostly topped off. Like, you don't have to keep them at 100%, but anything under 80 is in that zone where your average idiot DPS is taking a strong hit to the face could just die, especially in a Mythic Plus dungeon. So, you know, even while leveling, it's like, I'll just keep people, you know, more topped off. So if they pull aggro or they back into some mob or whatever, they don't just get one shot. I have a chance to hopefully react and save them, though that's not true for everyone. Alright, so you can see that I'm hanging out in Gnomeregan. Most people's, I don't know, it's like a love-hate dungeon. You either really like it or you hate it. It doesn't personally bother me. I'll be honest, everybody that's like, oh, I just want to explore the dungeon, I get it, but I've done this dungeon, I cannot tell you how many times. Hundreds, possibly even thousands of times. Since I do like running old instances for like transmog and stuff. And I don't want to explore this dungeon. They gave us a parachute in this dungeon for a reason, and I want to get it over with as quickly as possible. Mostly because the experience that you get for completing the dungeon is worth far more than like the mob killing experience. So your best bet is always going, like experience wise, is always going to be to just bum rush to the end of the dungeon. It is what it is. Unfortunate for newer people that want to just kind of explore. They don't really get a chance to see what's going on. Stuff just dies so fast. But I do think dungeons are a little bit more, maybe slower paced than they were when the level cap was 120, because heirlooms just let you, like, destroy stuff. And now heirlooms are just, they're nice to have because they scale with you, but they don't give an XP bonus anymore. So they're only good in the sense that you don't have to replace them as you level up. And obviously, as an altaholic, I love using them, but they're not as necessary, and you don't they don't have the power. Like, remember when they first introduced heirlooms? There for like 2 or 3 expansions, they were incredibly overpowered, and you just did astronomical amounts of damage, and everybody hated you if you were new because you couldn't keep up. But that's not really the case anymore. I would say that a lot of the blue gear that drops of equivalent eye level is actually pretty equivalent in terms of stats and stuff. Sometimes it'll even be better, so that's nice. I don't really know what else to say about this dungeon, honestly. If people pick up the parachutes instead of just jumping, like you could see that guy jump down without a parachute, or maybe he tried to click it but like failed, since it is a little bit buggy with how it appears on the UI, like, or if it even does appear. There are little parachute like boxes. There's one up there by that boss that you can just pick the parachute up out of the box and then use it, so that's nice. But yeah, this is another pretty straightforward dungeon. Like, honestly, even if you pull extra on accident in this dungeon, it's probably not gonna kill you anymore. Like, it won't wipe the group. I don't know, it's pretty simple. And you can see the people in this group are pretty good. Like, they're all keeping up. Nobody's panicking. Nobody's dying. Uh, if again, if you are a new healer, you've never really healed, or maybe it's been a long time since you've healed, this is a great option. It's not as fast as questing, so you won't hit the level cap nearly as quickly, but you do get in practice healing. Is it the same as healing at level 60? No, but you also get familiarity with your keybinds and all of that stuff, so you're not fumbling around in a level 60 dungeon with, you know, somewhat impatient DPS and possibly an impatient tank. It's just, this is the way to learn. Like, honestly, this is the way to start learning. Going into a leveling dungeon. Obviously, you can't really do that if you have a healer that's already 60 that you want to try out, but in that case, just, I would start with normal dungeons because they're going to be a lot less stressful for you, and the price that you pay if you do fail is not nearly as high as, say, in a plus 12. So, I don't know. I enjoy dungeon leveling, like I said. I really enjoy it. You meet all kinds of people. You learn things that you might not have known, especially if you're not super familiar with all the old dungeons. I know I don't know, I really enjoy the old dungeons, and I I've tried to get into questing because it's so much faster. And I mean, like, ridiculously fast. You could quest like 10 to 50, I think, in like 5 or 6 hours if you're pretty good. Like, that's not the world record, but if you're pretty good. And definitely in less than 10 if you're, you know, slower like I might be questing. Because I've done all the questing zones so many times in the past that I did a bunch of them even before Kata dropped, and then after Kata dropped, of course, I had to try them all out. And then now it's like, I just don't want to quest anymore. Like, I've done that. And you might be like, but you do dungeons and you've done these hundreds or thousands of times. And I'd be like, yeah, you know what, fair point. But for some reason, the group composition changing up and not having to rely solely on myself to get to the end and succeed, I think makes dungeons stand out a little bit more to me. I just enjoy them more, but they are so much slower. And I mean, again, I did like 61 dungeons to hit level 60. So it was it was painful. It was so painful. Kind of like Gnomeregan can be if you've never been here before and you see people just jumping off the edge of the cliff. Like, I don't know, do I follow them? Nah, I'm okay with most of these dungeons. Anyway, we're almost done with this, and I haven't really even talked about keybinds or anything like that, so I'll probably bring that up in the next video, which, again, is just going to be going over the leveling the rest of the way to 60. And, again, it's not going to be just, you know, full dungeons. It's going to be more of like a cut and paste of moments that were probably worth talking about, just because it was an adventure, and it was a long adventure. So I don't want to bore everybody with it, but I do think that it deserves its own spot in this just because I healed through it. Like, that's all I did was heal, and I did a few quests here and there, you know, but for the most part, I didn't, like, that's all I did. All I did was dungeon level, except for a few quests here and there, like in the 50 to 60 range, and I think it's important to kind of go over what it was like to level, and then I can hit up part 3, like the third video, with solely just what it was like gearing up for Mythic Plus and doing my first Mythic Plus, which I think might be useful for people that hit 60 and then don't really know what to do to get into Mythic Plus. So hopefully it'll be fun, and I definitely hope that y'all join me for that. And for now, though, that's going to be it. That's everything. I went that entire dungeon and didn't have a hot for enveloping mist, and it was driving me nuts. But I decided that rather than mess my UI up by trying to do stuff with it in the dungeon, that I would wait till after the dungeon so that I could see how long the hot on enveloping mist was going to last. So that's all for the introduction to 0 to KSM Hero. I hope you will all join me next time for more of this, but like way faster. And until I see you guys again, happy healing!